mayhem, a little bit too much mayhem in the AM has cost some Atlanta sports talk radio shock jocks they jobs off a Lincoln Financial Media radio station. So what is good, everybody, especially all of y'all, of course, out there in Tubeville, sports fans, radio fans, if you're an Atlanta Falcons fan, of course, yourself as well. So what's good on the internet, what's good in life, what's good in sports, what's good in radio? My name is Akeem Balaam. So especially if you're in Atlanta, you probably know about the news about that what just dropped yesterday on 790 The Zone. In fact, a morning show was dropped from 790 The Zone for what can rather be described as a rather tasteless radio bit that they tried to pull off on this very radio station, 790 The Zone, WQXI, which I still call Quixie because that's what the call letters stand for, WQXI. But these were the radio hosts that were dropped from this radio station: Chris Dimino, Nick Cellini, and Shapiro. If you're in Atlanta, you probably know who these cats are. What happened was on their morning show, on the Mayhem in the AM morning show on 790 The Zone, what happened was that it looks like that they decided to do a little bit of a radio bit where they mocked a former New Orleans Saint by the name of Steve Gleason, who retired in 2008, and then we found out that he was diagnosed with ALS, also known by many, of course, as Lou Gehrig's disease. So they've played a little bit of a radio bit. I put the link in it too on YouTube. And when I didn't know exactly what everybody was talking about, but I knew everybody was talking about it. But when I first heard it, I was like, huh? Come again? They actually played and aired this. Somebody actually sat in a room, whether it was a program director or whether it was a producer or show producer, somebody who came up with this idea, decided to make fun of this cat just because he's a New Orleans Saint. And this is an Atlanta radio station. So you know what we're going to do? You know what? The Atlanta fans aren't necessarily all that receptive to the New Orleans Saints, so we think that we're going to get some publicity. We think that we're going to get some ratings. We think we're going to get some headlines out of this. So we'll run it anyway, even if we're not necessarily all that comfortable with it. So what they did is that they ran the bit anyway, and it was really tasteless. It really brought down the level of radio, I believe, in Atlanta a huge notch. But then again, you can say 790 has done that for a long time, actually, but it was a rather tasteless bit making fun of somebody with ALS, with this disease. Obviously, neither Nick Cellini or Chris Dimino or Shapiro have no family or friends or loved ones with ALS, or maybe they would have been a little bit sensitive about this topic like most of us are, because most of us are sensitive to this topic. Most of us do recognize how sad this is for people with ALS, because even if we don't necessarily have anybody in our family or any loved ones that have this disease, we're of course receptive to it because it's such a terrible thing to have. Well, what happened was at first it came out that it looked like that Dimino, Cellini, and Shapiro were going to be, in fact, Shapiro, ironically, the guy who co-founded 790 The Zone. It looked like that they were at first. Initially, they were suspended from the radio station. Then it turned out that they were just outright fired, pink slipped, all that good mess from 790 The Zone, and the Mayhem in the AM show is no more. And it looks like that they are going to indeed run the ESPN Mike and Mike in the place of course, Mayhem in the AM, considering that 790 The Zone is now an ESPN affiliate after 680 The Fan, the former ESPN radio affiliate in Atlanta, switched over to CBS Sports Radio after CBS Sports Radio debuted January 2nd of this year, 2013, which sent over the ESPN affiliation over to 790. So that's what it looks like it's going to be the plan, at least for 790 going forward. There's already been, they've already tried to make statements on Twitter and through the radio. In fact, Nick Cellini already did an interview with Access Atlanta pretty much saying that his firing for the station was actually somewhat of a blessing in disguise, because he was basically saying that, the station was destined to fail because of what happened with 680 The Fan and also because of 92.9 The Game. Remember, 92.9 The Game is already starting to make a name for themselves in the Atlanta market, locking up the broadcast rights starting in 2013. They've already locked up the broadcast rights for the Atlanta Hawks. And also remember, let's also look at this from a perspective of where Atlanta sports are. The Braves are on 680, and they're also on 100.5, and also they're on a 93.7 translator that airs 680 The Fan as well. In addition, you got the Falcons on 790 and Star 94, and now you got the Hawks on 82.9 The Game. what would happen with 790 The Zone if it were to happen that the Falcons were to leave this radio station, because now everybody all of a sudden knows what this Atlanta 790 The Zone radio station is famous for. Oh, that's the radio station that aired that ALS bit. That's the radio station that tried to make fun of Steve Gleason for having ALS, and they thought that they could be able to get away with it. Those are those jerk offs at that Atlanta radio station that tried to get away with it and didn't think they would notice. Oh, well, New Orleans certainly noticed, because their sports talk radio station on FM dial 106.1 The Ticket, ironically another Cumulus station just like 680 The Fan, they got wind of it and they were talking about it all day yesterday on 106.1 The Ticket down in New Orleans. So they got wind of this whole thing as well. But bringing this thing back into an Atlanta focus, you gotta wonder about this as far as the future of 790 The Zone. I mean, with 92.9 The Game already, they're the first FM talk station, and also 680 The Fan, and they're on 93.7. And given what Cellini said about 790 The Zone being on FM, there was talk a few years ago that perhaps they would scrap Star 94 and put 790 The Zone on 94.1, because it seemed at that time that everybody and a mama was flipping to FM sports. Of course, CBS led the charge, and of course that's what eventually led to the creation this year of the national CBS Sports Radio Network. But this is a PR disaster, not only for Lincoln Financial Media, but also for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, for Lincoln Financial Media, there's a national Fox Sports Radio personality whose name I cannot think of off the tip of my tongue, but there is a national sports radio personality who tweeted that he is no longer going to be appearing on 790 The Zone because of what happened, with this radio stunt. Also, the Atlanta Falcons, they had to issue a statement as well, because, of course, 790 The Zone, you got to remember, of course, 790 The Zone is the AM flagship of Atlanta Falcons Radio Network, along with the FM flagship, which is Star 94. And there's already been some talk maybe that when their next contract comes up, that maybe they'll go ahead and they'll leave Lincoln Financial Media, they will leave this radio station, because I remember also Chris Dimino and Shapiro, they also do, I believe, either pregame or postgame work on Atlanta Falcons, on the Atlanta Falcons radio network. So there's also that to consider. But there's just a lot of layers to what happened. I mean, there was a disgraceful, distasteful radio stunt, obviously, as we all know. And it looks like that Cellini and Dimino and Shapiro already know, they're already trying to make amends for it. I got no doubt in my mind that ultimately, I think that sometime inside the city of Atlanta, Chris Dimino and, Nick Cellini already has some stuff on the side that he does. But I think ultimately, because of the fact that they have such big names, somebody down the road, I believe, will go ahead and they will hire Chris Dimino and or Shapiro, and they will be back on the Atlanta sports airwaves rather, maybe not soon, but I think that they'll find some way to put themselves out there and try to reclaim their name after this. But definitely a huge PR disaster for 790 The Zone, as well as the Atlanta Falcons. And you gotta wonder, some people are even saying, oh, they did this to get ratings because they're worried about the competition that 92.9 The Game has brought, and also because of 680 The Fan and what they already have established in Atlanta radio. So how distasteful was the stunt? What do you think of this already becoming news, and already New Orleans already getting their hands on this, because they know about this in New Orleans? So everybody knows about this, and everybody knows these names rather infamously for a rather mistimed radio stunts. So rate, comment, react, reply, and subscribe. Once again, I look forward to reading your comments as always, because I'm just one guy talking about sports, radio, and other randomness here on YouTube and wherever else. And also look out for my 2 new shows, On the Field with Akeem Balaam and On the Air with Akeem Balaam, debuting this weekend. Already trying to line up guests. So there's that as well. So until next time, I'm Akeem Balaam signing off once again. See you on the internet someplace.